Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the official November meeting for the Spokane Smile of the Tolkien Society, Tolkien Society. My name is Anthony, and I'm here to just introduce things. And I'll also want to welcome back our Supreme Secretary, yours truly, Brian Huseland.
Welcome everybody. Good to be
And,
back.
and
I'm beardless, as Gary has already remarked on,
Yeah.
and so I could never be mistaken for a dwarf. And joining you from home here in Spokane, and glad to be back. All right, next person, go ahead and introduce yourself.
uh, I guess I'm here in Mountain Home, Idaho, um, via the magic of our digital environment. So anyway, my name is Gary Hagland. I've been a Tolkien fan since I was in freshman year of college, which was 1965. And an interesting couple turned me on to The Hobbit, and after The Hobbit, I read The Lord of the Rings, and all these years later, here I am. I found you guys on the internet, by the way.
Oh, hey, we just got a new participant joining in.
Gary, you got to watch out for crazy groups you find on the internet. We might be extremists.
Yeah, looking at you folks, yeah.
Chris, go ahead and just do your intro. We just are going around and starting off.
Greetings from the South Farthing, where it is a nice 60-degree day, and we completed our Veterans Day parade with multiple people in West Richland, and just sitting down to a nice afternoon, looking out the window, watching the squirrels go and soar stuff in the maple tree.
Well, they're getting ready.
Yes, we are. Yeah, Anthony. We had Esther last month who joined us as a new person. Did she say if she was coming today?
No, I have not heard from her at all. Um, yeah, I don't know if we probably should have added her to the email list unless somebody
Yes,
else.
she was there.
Did she leave any information so that you could reach out to her?
No.
Okay. Maybe after the meeting, if you on your way out can look at the sign-in sheet, maybe there's a way to reach out to her, or when Hawk gets back.
Yeah.
So it was nice to see a new face. Nothing wrong with the old faces. I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, I think it's good to kind of expand our sort of literary circle to include other folks.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are you guys able to see Joey? He's also here.
Oh,
Hi, Joey.
Hi.
and Joey,
So
if
today,
you're in the RPG, we can only see Anthony.
Oh, okay.
that's fine. You can pitch in when you have a comment to make, Joey,
All right.
or let Anthony know, and then he can make sure that you get a turn to talk.
All right.
So, well, you did a great job, Anthony. I looked over the video from last month, and that was really great to be able to hear just different things and be able to. There he is.
Yep.
Wave, Joey.
Hey.
You're on camera.
Yeah.
There's your 10 minutes of fame right there.
Yeah.
Okay. So, are you okay with if you don't maybe just kind of recap what you talked about last month, and then
Sure.
I'd be happy to take it from there if you want, Anthony.
Yeah, sure. I think we kind of did our usual format, which was, going into some Tolkien-related news. I don't remember exactly what the news was, but well, I can actually I had the email here. We yeah, we went into some Tolkien related news, I think, but I can't remember specifically. But we mostly talked about kind of our favorite passages from Tolkien. Although we didn't get a chance to delve too deeply into the Fall of Arthur, which was Tolkien's take on Arthurian legend. And so we then we went into I think letter 216.
That's where I thought you guys might be.
Yeah, 216, 217. I can't remember which. But
They're both short ones. Yeah.
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 So
Okay.
that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, again, thanks so much for carrying the torch here. It takes, if it doesn't take a village, at least it takes a small hamlet, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, Gary
A
and
A
Chris.
Gilean Hamlet.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Prince Hamlet.
Yeah, Gary and Chris, it's so good to have you both on here. And I was thinking about how it would be very appropriate today for us, as I mentioned in my email, to focus a little bit on World War One, since today happens to land on November 11th, which of course we used to call, I think, Decoration Day maybe was the original, or no, Armistice Day. That's what it was originally.
Yeah, it was Armistice Day.
And then I'm not sure what year that was, Gary, maybe you remember, but at some point in the past it changed to Veterans Day.
Yeah, I wasn't around then, but I think it was like 1938.
Well,
God, I'm not that
I
old.
thought you were like an ant that remembers everything. No,
Yeah.
I in all fairness, I thought it could have changed in the 60s or 70s. Okay, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Maybe it did.
I thought it was one of those things. I thought maybe it was something Nixon did before he got out of office, you know.
Resigned.
No, I don't think so. I mean,
Okay, so it must have been fairly early on, and I'm thinking the main push for it would have been after World War II, right? Because, well, let's save this discussion for later. I'm still hoping that Sarah might join us, and I want to make sure that tonight, as I mentioned in my email, we're going to hit talking kind of part 2 on talking about the Lord of the Rings in other languages. And I don't think Sarah will be able to join us because I haven't heard back from her yet by email or by WhatsApp. So she's probably got a previous engagement for that. But in any case, I do have a Spanish and a German version of the poem at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings. It was actually quite difficult to find online, so I just used Amazon, and then you know how they give you a sample preview, and so I just, because it's at the very beginning of Lord of the Rings, it was easy just to pull those two up. And I'd love to read the German one, but if anybody else wants to read a different translation, if you know a different language, or I think maybe actually Chris, you might be partially fluent in German, or if you can find the Japanese version and want to read that for us, we'll give you a few minutes to dig that out. Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Are you saying
the Japanese version is easy because it's ring and monogatari, so it's ubiwa monogatari, which means, you know, the tail of the ring. That's all. But that's
Okay.
all I know. Okay.
Well,
And also, I do have something, Brian, here from a German gentleman.
okay.
He
So
says-
before we get started on this, let me ask you, Gary. You'll lead off on this. So just in terms of how the structure today looks, let's start with translations of the Lord of the Rings, and then we'll go on from there to Tolkien and the Great War,
Okay.
and then reading the next letter of Tolkien from his letters book, and then any other Tolkien-related news and popular culture. Does that sound good?
That sounds like a plan.
Yep, that
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay.
Everything okay, Anthony, or do we need to pause?
Nope, I was just shutting the door.
Okay, great. Well, then let's go ahead and get started. And Gary, I'm going to pass it off to you with the discussion on translations into other languages besides the language that Tolkien, of course, wrote The Lord of the Rings in, which was English.
Well, there is a whole bunch of languages, as you might guess. And I sent out that Wikipedia article with, the languages and the translations and the translators and all this other stuff. But Dutch, of course, we know about. Swedish, Polish, Italian, several Italian translations, I was hoping that Sarah would be here. Danish, German, French, Japanese, where I said Yubiwa. If you understand any Japanese, Yubiwa is ring and Monogatari is the tail or tail of the ring. Very simple. Finnish, Norwegian, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Greek, Hebrew. One interesting thing about the Hebrew was I think during way back when some of the Israeli pilots had to who did not understand English, they translated The Lord of the Rings, into Hebrew, which had to be a heck of an operation. Anyway, Hungarian, Serbian, Catalan, which is I thought was a dialect of Spanish, Korean, Armenian, Bulgarian, Czech, Icelandic, which is a form of Norwegian, I believe, Lithuanian, Slovenian, Esperanto, the made-up international language, and Chinese, of course, Galatian. I have no idea what that is.
Galician?
It's not, it looks almost Spanish. Slovak, Thai, Macedonian, Basque, Indonesian, Latvian, Persian, Ukrainian, Arabic, Belarusian, Georgian, not Atlanta, but the country, and so on and so on. Africans, in South Africa, Yiddish, French, of course, Uzbek, Sinhala, which is the Sindarian language, probably around India or so. And I think I've mentioned Croatian before. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, just as a point, because the word dialect can be understood different ways. Catalan and Galician are both similar to Spanish, but they're actually their own languages. But the different kingdoms that composed what is now Spain, as they kind of amalgamated together, like King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, with their kingdoms of which ones were they again? The
Ferdinand was from
Aragon and
Isabella was
Castile.
Castile, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, what we consider Spanish was really just the Castilian Spanish, which ended up kind of becoming the official language of the whole peninsula, except for Portugal. So, yeah. But that's interesting, isn't it? That if it's translated into these different things, then things that we would look at and we think, isn't that basically, don't they just speak Russian? But it must be different enough that they have their own.
Yeah, they've got their own dialect. And
Yeah.
I know with the Ukrainian language, basically from the war that's going on, most Ukrainians understand Russian because they were part of the Soviet Union, but Russians don't understand Ukrainian.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
it's
and
quite interesting.
The same is true of German and Schwäbisch, which is a mix of German and Swiss. And there's a bunch of kind of middle ground. And, you know, we have the same thing. British English and Aussie English are different animals.
Remember what Winston Churchill said he was delivering an address in Missouri? He said, "We're two nations separated by a common language."
True statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his mother was American. Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. So Gary, what fascinates you about just this topic? You know, what kind of compelled you to be really interested in it?
Well, I thought of first of all, when I believe somebody said that Sarah said that when she read The Lord of the Rings in Italian, she came away with a kind of a different perspective on it, and I don't know if that's the correct term or not. So I thought of it, and I also, in our readings, with that we do every day, which is pretty soon out of date, by the way.
Yeah, there's a new edition of the letters coming out in a couple days.
Yeah. Anyway,
Expanded.
I remember Tolkien being upset on how his names were being translated into other languages, and
There's a great article on that, actually. Did you look that up, Gary?
no, I didn't. I actually looked for stuff. I mean,
Well, it's in the. If you look at the link that Gary sent on the Wikipedia article on translations, at the very bottom, you'll see one called "Lord of the Errors," or "Who Really Killed the Witch King." So I'll put it in the chat. Actually, it's a blog spot, so you have to blog. Yeah, it's a blogger. Let's see if I can pull this in here. So there's the link. But I'll just read the first little bit, and then I'll see what you guys think. By Martin Anderson, and I'm not sure how old this is. Goes back quite a ways. In 1959 to 1961, 3 rather peculiar books were published in Sweden. They were titled Sagan om ringen, Sagan om de två tornen, and Sagan om Konungens that'd be återkomst. The author was an Oxford professor of English who was almost completely unknown in Sweden at the time. The translation of his first novel, a children's book, was published in 1947 under the title Hompen, featuring an unlikely hero with hairy feet renamed, amusingly enough, Bimbo Backlund for the Swedish audience.
Bimbo?
The critics were confused. The books were full of dwarves and elves and all manner of fairy tale creatures, but the length of the novel, because it was actually one huge novel published in 3 volumes, and the sometimes very dark story seemed to suggest that it was aimed for adults. They were, however, agreed on one point: the translation was excellent. They had apparently not read the original, but more on that later. The translator, Åke Åmarks, had a glowing but self-inflated reputation for brilliancy. During his long career, he translated such classics as Shakespeare, Dante, the Icelandic sagas, and the Quran. And Åmarks did not waste any time in reaping credit either. It was one thing he liked. It was being told how brilliant he was and telling others how brilliant he was. But the Oxford professor who had written the books was less than impressed. His name was, of course, j.r.r. Tolkien, and the books were, of course, the fantasy classic, The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien had some slight knowledge of Swedish, enough to enable him to understand the contents of a text when equipped with a good dictionary, and he disliked Åmark's translation even before it was published, as shown in the following letter to his publisher, Rainer Unwin, dated 1957. So I'm thinking, have we already gotten to this yet?
We
In
might
the letter?
have. It sounds familiar.
I'll just read
I
one
don't
little
remember.
piece here. He says, what annoyed Tolkien most was Åmark's casual attitude towards the names in the novel. None of them was invented by pure accident. Tolkien spent a lot of time getting them absolutely right in their particular context. The language spoken by the hobbits was related to that of the Rohirrim, although the latter was more archaic, and since the hobbit language was presented as English in the novel, It was only natural that the language of the Rohirrim was represented by genuine Old English. And then he says, Olmarks was completely unaware of this. He realized that since The Lord of the Rings was supposed to be a translation from the fictitious Westron language into English, he had to create a translation into Swedish that conveyed the feeling of a direct translation from the Westron, one of his few brilliant insights. But he was unfortunately not as sensitive when it came to actually transferring the names from English to Swedish because he didn't know English very well. For example, he wrote asking Tolkien for feedback, and Tolkien gave it. The town of Archit was translated Gammelby, which means basically old town in Swedish. And Tolkien's like, I'm guessing he saw Archit and thought it meant archaic. Another example, Rivendell becomes Vatnadal, or Waterdale, probably because Olmarks thought that Riven had something to do with river, even though they mean something totally different. And this is my favorite one, Esgaroth, or Esgaroth, yeah, which is the lake, the lake by, the Lonely Mountain. Esgaroth, that is Esgaroth is actually, yeah, I'm getting all confused here. Esgaroth is
it by Lake Town?
Lake Town is the lake itself is called Esgaroth. I'm pretty sure. Let me pull up my atlas here. Yeah, Esgaroth becomes Snigalov, which is an very old Swedish word that means the slime that a snail leaves behind. Most likely because Olmarks was thinking of the French word escargot when he saw Esgaroth.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah, Esgaroth is actually the name of the town itself.
Oh, okay.
So Esgaroth is Lake Town, so it's the Elvish name for it, and then the lake is just called Long Lake.
Oh, okay.
That's funny.
That's correct.
Yes.
So that was in 1957, 57 through 61.
What's that?
That
Yeah,
was
1961. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he made a lot of recommendations, and I'm not sure how many of those the Swedish translator took into consideration, but you can see how bad it is. Any other comments on, besides Gary, Anthony, or Chris, on what you think is interesting about translations, or why that's a good thing and why it's also a hard thing?
It is a very difficult thing. If I may use a little bit of scriptural translation information, there is a Japanese Bible that was translated in the 1500s that survived, that's kind of analogous to King James Version, that modern day Japanese really don't like reading because of the archaicness of and rareness of some of the symbols used. And then there's a new translation that's approachable but does not contain the richness that is necessary to convey the full meaning. Mm-hmm. And translators always struggle with that. The approachableness versus archaicness of a translation becomes a difficult thing. And I'm sure that Tolkien, as he was doing his OED work, had lots to think about.
Well, and helped to translate the Jerusalem Bible, which was the Catholic
yes
translation, I'm guessing, from the Greek and the Hebrew. I mean, they had the Vulgate previously, which would have been translated to English, but I'm guessing that the Jerusalem was translated from Greek and Hebrew.
It was translated from Greek and Hebrew and Vulgate and French. So it kind of it drew from a bunch of sources, and I wonder if Tolkien liked that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is. I picked this up from some books that were being given away, and this was quite valuable, I guess, just because it's expensive to buy these now. But it's the Hebrew Old Testament, the original, the Stuttgartensia
Oh,
Codex.
yeah. Well, my high school Latin teacher just reminded us at least every week that translation was an art. And it certainly is, and it's difficult. Like Coop says, it's really difficult. So I've got some more. I've got some like vignettes. What I found on Reddit of all places,
Yeah, go ahead.
and I'd like to read them because I think, like you were going to talk a little bit about, the German introduction to the Lord of the Rings. Anyway, this one gentleman says, I'm German and found the poems in the books always a bit annoying and until I read the original ones, in other words, in English. Now I think they're great. I guess you can't really translate poetry. So, I mean, this guy's got a good knowledge of English language, apparently.
Yeah. Should I read the German right now then, or after
Yeah,
you're
go
done
for it.
with
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Well, Cooperstein could probably do a better job, but since it's his ancestral language, Cooperstein, along with many other ones. I actually found a street. Remember that, Chris? I was in Wittenberg.
Yes.
I found one with your name on it. So here's the German. This is so. Let's read the English first. Yeah. Maybe somebody could find that a moment. Do you? I mean, I can read it, but I don't want to be the only one who's reading. But does anybody have it handy there?
No, I've got it in the other room. I've got the same edition, the 50th anniversary.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Yeah.
I can try to pull it up on my phone. Not exactly the best tool, but
That's okay. Yeah.
It holds a place of honor in the bookcase in the living room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, what section of the are you talking about? The ring verse, Brian?
The ring verse. That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So
The epigraph, whatever it's called.
yeah, do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie.
Ooh. Love it. All right.
I'm going.
Yep. Okay. So my wife will be back in a minute. I'm going to read the Spanish one. I'm going to read the German. Drei Ringe, den Elbenkönigen hoch im Licht. 7 den Zwergenherrschern in ihren Hallen aus Stein. Den Sterblichen ewig dem Tote verfallen 9. Einer dem dunklen Herrn auf dunklem Thron im Lande Mordor, wo die Schatten drohen. Ein Ring, sie zu knechten, sie alle zu finden. Zu finden, I think, actually. Ein Ring, sie zu knechten, sie alle zu finden, ins Dunkel zu treiben und ewig zu binden, im Lande Mordor, wo die Schatten drohen. So.
I understood land and I understood Mordor.
9. 9 means 9.
Okay.
All right.
I took 2 years of college level German, and I recognized Schatten, which means shadows.
Good job. Okay. My wife is going to read, and she'll do a much better job, the Spanish version.
Well, I've got a vignette here from Mexico.
Oh, okay. Go
Oh,
ahead.
very nice.
Read that one
And,
first.
and this guy writes, and I mean, this comes from Reddit, so it says Mexico here. I did read The Lord of the Rings in Spanish for the first time some 24 years ago. I just purchased the edition illustrated by Alan Lee in English, trying the book in the original language for the first time. And one of the replies to him was, Buena suerte. Suerte.
Good luck.
Good luck. Okay, so.
Okay, all right. Here is the ring verse in Spanish.
3 anillos para los reyes elfos bajo el cielo, 7 para los señores enanos en casas de piedra, 9 para los hombres mortales condenados a morir, 1 para el Señor oscuro sobre el trono oscuro, en la tierra de Mordor, donde se extienden las sombras. Un anillo para gobernarlos a todos, un anillo para encontrarlos, un anillo para atraerlos a todos y atarlos en las tinieblas, en la tierra de Mordor, donde se extiendan las sombras.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice.
I understood
Gracias.
Mordor again.
It's a mouthful, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I would just add that along with the difficulties we've already outlined is, whenever you try to translate ideas and story, I think some things translate better than others, don't they? Clearly, the heroic. You talked about this last month, didn't you, Anthony? About I think Esther made the comment about the heroic kind of thread throughout, and you guys were referring Joseph Campbell,
Yes.
some of that archetypes. I think the universal connection. It's why we have what is it, Chris? The famous Japanese filmmaker. It's like you've got the Seven Samurai or whatever.
Oh, yeah. God.
And then we kind of
Kurosawa.
Kurosawa. I've heard the Magnificent Seven was based on that, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh yes, the Magnificent.
It is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's based on Seven Samurai.
So, isn't this amazing that you can have vastly different cultures, but samurai and cowboys, which again seem completely different, right? That there'd be some sense of parallelism, enough that it's going to look different in different cultures, but there's a powerful connection to something that transcends, cultures and connects us together as human beings. This is really about being human. On the other hand, you've got names and other things, which, as Gary had pointed out last year when we were kind of wondering what the Rings of Power would look like, and some fear or concern for being politically correct, that would there be a loss of that whole thing too, where you're these stories come out of a Northern European context, which they should stay true to. At the same time, I think there's something wonderful about them being loved and received and translated, and in a sense they are going to maybe change a little bit, but I don't think that's necessarily all bad, as long as you give honor and first place to the English translation.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I agree with you, Brian. The Rings of Power, my problem with it was not having people of different ethnicities. It was, from what I saw, individual actors who really didn't get it over very well. In other words, Elrond was like a disappointment. And they were real disappointments, mostly the elves, but still.
Right.
But that was very interesting when your wife came in.
It just changes everything, doesn't it? It's
See,
Here's some other things that I like to get through on the whole.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Because some of it is pretty funny. One side here, and it's kind of interesting. It says Israel, kind of a side fun fact, the first Hebrew translation of The Hobbit was written by Israeli fighter pilots during their time in Egyptian captivity. They had the book, but some of their comrades didn't know English well, so they translated the whole thing for them. Since then, there have obviously been professional translations, but you still can get the pilot's version. I have no idea about that.
Really?
Russia, and I heard, of course, the old Soviet Union, and they had problems with the Lord of the Rings because it seemed too individualistic versus, of course, they were a collective society. But anyway, this guy writes, he's from Russia. He says, Soviet Union and Russia have always had a large Tolkien fan base. The Hobbit was translated into Russian and published in the Soviet Union in 1976 and was later even studied in university textbooks of English linguistics. Lord of the Rings was first translated into Russian in 1982, only the first book of the trilogy, easy for me to say, the three-part series. Then it was fully translated into Russian in the early 1990s. So I think that's interesting too. Here's somebody from Quebec, Canada. I first read Lord of the Rings in French, and a few years later, it was one of the first English books I read out of choice. I was around 14. It was not an easy read, but so satisfying. I mean, I'm an American, and the Air Force sent me to language school, and I was quite a bit older at the time, and I learned some Japanese by being over in Japan, but it's wild you can do something that young, but he must have been committed. Did you guys ever hear, the guy from Austria writes in, because of course he knows, of course, German is his language. He says, but consume all stuff in English, spells it wrong. Exception, saw Bakshi Lord of the Rings as a kid in German. And his little comment after that was still shit my pants. So I don't know what was there, but the Bakshi, I think, in German is one of the more well-known translations.
Well, that's actually a what we would call almost like an anime.
Okay.
It was animated. I think they used rotoscoping. I'm not really up on it. I think that would be a good discussion of its own that we could have about early versions predating the Jackson trilogy, like what that was like. I know for those of us who are older, we may have seen some of those. At least I'm pretty sure that Chris Cooperstein and I have probably seen, like the original animated Hobbit by Rankin Bass is something I grew up with, but I don't know that, Anthony, that you'd be familiar with those unless you went back and looked at them.
I've seen clips of the animated Hobbit Lord of the Rings, but I've not watched them in their entirety.
I have too, and to me, it didn't seem very satisfying.
No.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And Bakshi was a little bit closer just because it was more perilous. Like it wasn't cutesy. He used a very unusual. You should go on to YouTube and have a look because it's very interesting. But I don't know that it ever finished. I feel like it was they did the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers or something, but I don't know that it ever got done. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I thought they did the Return of the King, but
Oh.
I'm not quite sure.
Maybe they did it in two movies and they just kind of
Yeah.
combined the content into two.
Yeah, they condensed it.
There are some pretty legit scary moments for those. And we got to remember too, that was in the 1970s, I think.
Yeah.
Special effects, Star Wars, which looks so dated now, the original movie, episode 4.
I remember when that came out. Yeah.
It was actually groundbreaking in its use of special effects.
Yeah.
They were inventing new ways of doing special effects while they were filming the movie.
Yeah.
So previous to 1977, it wasn't great. So I think what that means is that an animated film that was using kind of a semi-realistic overlay of real people and shadows with animation was much freakier to the audiences then, especially if you were a kid, than it would be now. Now the kids would be like, this is lame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, especially the Zoomers, the Generation
Yeah.
Z.
Anyway, I got about three different
Okay,
comments I'd like to
go ahead.
get with. One is from a Slovak person um, who basically said he was excited to learn that Emma Horvath starred as Arian in Rings of Power, and he's just proud that she's a bilingual Slovak actress. So it's his connection to um, his country and the recent Tolkien stuff. And Arian, I looked it up, was the daughter of Elendil and the sister of Isildur. And I don't remember her in the TV series. Swedish and Norwegian here. I thought this was very interesting. Read the books in Swedish when I was about 8 or 9-ish, and then in English a few years later. Their Norwegian versions is a bit newer for me, but I read them in both New and Old Norwegian. Fun fact about the one in New Norwegian: the characters have different New Norwegian dialects, even in the written language, depending on their race. So I I'm Norwegian ancestry, but my knowledge of Norwegian is I guess, Manga Tusen Tak. That was it. That's it. And
Hoofda.
then, yeah. And then the last one I've got is from India, and this individual says, thanks to colonialism, I guess. He read Lord of the Rings.
Yes, yes. Is it possible that along with all the bad, that there could be some good from colonialism?
I think there was a lot of good from colonialism. If you remember, America was a colonial.
It was before we threw off our English oppressors.
Yes.
But the Lord of the Rings was written in the language of our oppressors, so I feel like maybe it was okay.
Yeah. Well, it was George Obama, Barack's brother, who told Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh gave him some money to get an operation, but he kind of wished the English would have stayed about 10 years longer in Kenya. So,
Okay. Well, let's move on and see.
probably wouldn't
Oh,
be
did you
so
have
many
another?
problems.
Did you have one more that you wanted to share, Gary?
No, that was it basically.
This reminds me of this discussion about translations. If we kind of one more thought on that was to do with translating subtitles for the Lord of the Rings movies. So that's interesting in itself, right? Like, what languages is it available, and
Yeah.
what languages is it not available? Because you have to get all the actors together. Well, that's dubbing. I guess you've got the dubbing versus subtitles kind of debate. If you do the subtitles, you've got to, and I watch a lot of foreign movies, and I prefer subtitles. But when I watch, so it's interesting because in some places, what language you have on the screen, right? Like, for example, I talked to a friend who's American. He had worked in Finland quite a bit. And he said that in southern Finland, there's a lot of Swedish people. They're like a pretty big minority. And like they've lived there, like great grandparents lived there, like just a lot of Swedish people, because the Kingdom of Sweden used to actually own Finland. And so it's part of their past. But anyway, he said TV over there, they don't have a lot of their own unique programming, because you'll have some stuff, but there's this big debate. Like, the Swedish speakers in Finland are very vocal as a minority, like, hey, we want equal rights for Swedish. So one of the ways they get around this is that they just have a lot of American films, and then they put both languages on the screen as subtitles. So so I'm imagining, like, the Lord of the Rings. Of course, I was thinking of streaming where you can choose which language, but if it's on TV, they show something that's American, they'll just have, the Finnish, and then underneath it they'll have the Swedish subtitles as well. So I'm imagining that's what they did when they showed the Lord of the Rings over there in Finland.
And the Finns say those annoying Swedes.
Yeah, well, and one other thing that maybe is worth saying is that because of these translations into many languages, you can find people who appreciate Tolkien's works in almost every country in the world, which I think is pretty wonderful. So anyway, so if we just could use this to help the Palestinians and Israelis, right? No, I'm joking. I know.
That's a
It's
whole
much more
different-
complicated. I understand.
Much more complicated.
It's much more complicated. Well, I guess we'll have to leave that now and move on. So any other comments before we get into Tolkien and the Great War? You guys remember the line from Star Trek 6? I don't know if you ever saw The Undiscovered Country, where the Klingons they're telling Captain Kirk, they're like, Shakespeare is read best in the original Klingon.
You know, I saw that in a meme someplace on the internet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, it's funny. I had no idea it was actually said.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
Shall
pretty
we,
sure-
Anthony, should we have like a 2-minute stretch break and
Yes.
come back?
Yes,
Okay.
that'd be wonderful. I need to use the restroom.
Right.
I'll be
Right.
right back.
All right, sounds good. Let's all mic. I'm gonna mute my mic. I'll be.
Same.
What's going on?
Oh, we're just taking a break.
Party.
You excited to play Diablo?
Mm-hmm.
Me too. Diablo.
Did you eat your lunch?
No, I'll eat it later. Remind me to grab it on the way out.
Oh.
I put it in the fridge. Oh shit! I was gonna look up something. I forgot. Oh, I think it was just.
While we're waiting for Gary, Chris, you're always a reliable source for Cooperstein. If you have any Tolkien related news or articles you want to share towards the end, feel free. Okay.
Yep.
Also, I wanted to apologize for the technical difficulties earlier.
I don't know if you heard that last what I was saying.
Apparently, Hawk's computer was muted, so that was the issue.
I had my sound off. Maybe I can hear you. Everybody good?
Yes.
Anthony, as we get into the discussion on World War I know we didn't have a discussion on the fall of Arthur that we had kind of hoped for. We've been going through this kind of process of looking through works that had influence on Tolkien.
Yeah.
Maybe just so you can have some thoughts on whether or not going back to your original document, if you want to still try for that next month, I will make an effort to read it and be able to comment more on it. I did read it quite a long time ago. Or we can just simply move on to the next medieval influence on Tolkien, because we're kind of almost getting to the end of the things that really shaped him. We haven't gotten to things like, did we have Canterbury Tales on there or not? I don't know if Chaucer would be considered.
Yeah, we do have Chaucer on there. We haven't gotten to him yet, though. We finished Geoffrey of Monmouth, and but yeah, if we want, we can do a discussion on the fall of Arthur next month. I'd be open to that. Also, I want to apologize again for the technical difficulties experienced earlier. Hawk's computer was muted apparently, so.
No problem. We can all relate. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and carry on then. I would like to go around just briefly so everybody gets a chance to share what connection personally, totally aside from Tolkien, okay, do you have any connection to World War I? Maybe someone in your family, or maybe you saw the movie 1917, or maybe for you it's completely unknown territory. You don't know much about it. But I thought it'd be kind of fun to go around and share that before we kind of dive into discussing Tolkien and the Great War. So I'm going to ask Anthony if you want to just share if there's anything. Again, I'm thinking before we kind of talk about our thoughts on Tolkien and on maybe that video that you guys might have watched on YouTube, just any connection that you have. Like, was World War I kind of a pretty big mystery to you in previous to kind of reading about Tolkien's connection to it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so as far as I know, I have absolutely no personal connection to the war. I mean, I don't think any of my ancestors fought in it or served, but I really first started studying World War I in high school. I think it was for AP World History, and also reading the book All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque, which is a fantastic book about the war, and also seeing 2 movie versions of it. And then actually, last night I watched, in addition to that documentary on Tolkien and the Great War, I also watched Peter Jackson's film, They Shall Not Grow Old.
Oh, really?
That's a really fantastic documentary, because it really consists of, it pretty much consists of both video footage as well as sound testimony from World War I veterans, probably made decades ago. So yeah, I think I mean World War One is a fascinating war to study just because it in a way some of the end of it, as well as the Treaty of Versailles and all that, kind of in some ways indirectly led to World War Two.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Chris, any connection or kind of like what Anthony said about coming across World War One, maybe in maybe in some form that you grew up knowing about?
Well, I'll start with Anthony's idea. Well, the idea has flown my mind already. Let's see. So, in my wife's research on Solomon Cooperstein, we found out that he tried to sign up for World War One, but his immigration paperwork says one country in one place and another country in another place, and so the feds thought that he may have been a spy or some other influence, having so recently come over in 1904 from the Czech, Polish, Russian intersection. And so he unfortunately did not get to fight, though he wanted.
Your great-grandfather?
Yes. Though he wanted to, he was prohibited from doing so. So he was happy when his son, my grandfather, was able to fight in Sicily in World War II. World War One, I learned my high school teachers were very went to great lengths to point out the evils of chemical warfare as part of their education in high school. And I'm thinking this was kind of the last, in one respect, this was kind of the last gasp of the great British Empire as it was unwinding itself and devolving of itself of the pile of wealth that it had amassed through the Dutch East India Company over the past several centuries. And I can't help but draw a line to where we are today as, in my opinion, American imperialists who are, it's been winding down for the past 40 years, and now we no longer have money for war. And the Brits kind of were in the same boat by that time of World War One, and the only thing that kept them alive was all the very harsh payments from other countries. Winning the war meant that other countries were paying tribute back to you, and some of those bonds have only just been paid off in the last decade.
By Germany, you mean?
By Germany and a few other countries, yes. So, 100-year debt. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. And that's not to say that war is not terrible, because it is terrible, or sometimes necessary, and that there is some kind of sense of reparations, or like I think of Japan and how Japan had to be occupied for a time.
Yeah.
But that the goal, your goal is not to cripple permanently the economy and the place that you're leaving, because that's going to lead to other problems that you're just going
to. It led to World War II.
That's one thing that looked at too. I think in World War II, as it went along and we saw we were going to overcome the Axis powers, I think this was a Roosevelt's idea, and basically Truman and probably others, that we couldn't trust the Europeans again to manage the peace because, Versailles had caused such a huge problem. Anyway, I've got a few things to add about this whole thing of World War One. I'm a bit older than you gentlemen. And I'm looking at myself on the screen, and I'm thinking, look at. Anyway,
We're glad you're here, Gary.
Yeah,
We appreciate your wisdom.
my I was growing up, and World War One veterans there was still quite a few of them around, and my grandfather was in the army in World War One. But the one individual I remember the most, and his first name is Johnny, and I can't remember his last. But he had been part of a platoon or a company that had been gassed, and I don't know if it's more than mustard gas, but it really affected him neurologically. And I mean, he couldn't hold down a job, except Bud Schultz, who owned a corner grocery store, gave him a job of, packing groceries, and he would carry it out for the customers and things like that. And it was sad because he had a lot of lot of problems walking, and it was really difficult. And an analogy might be this day and age, people who have been victims of an IED. They lose a leg, or they lose an arm, that type of thing. So, but it was that really brought home to me the horror of gas warfare and why they outlawed it. And the reason they outlawed it was, because not because it hurt your enemies so bad, but because the wind could change and it would blow across your own lines. So that's why they stopped it. That, like I said, was I guess I'm a lot closer to World War One, and of course my folks were World War II generation. My dad was in, the Third Army in Europe, so they were the adults I grew up with, World War One and World War II. And
My goodness.
And it's I can see, especially because of what happened to Johnny, that how horrible it could be. And you read about the trench warfare and the gas attacks and all the crap that they had to go through. And it like I said, it was a lot closer to me than today's generation, and you guys followed me. So
Wow, that's thank you for sharing Johnny's story, and how many were like him, right?
yeah.
This is my great uncle. This is my grandpa's older brother. His name was Teddy, and he served in the Army, the Grand Expeditionary Force. Of course, the U.S. didn't join formally until 1917, but he was actually in Minnesota at the time. My great grandparents were farming there, and he was adopted, but they didn't tell him until he was 16, and then they sat him down and explained to him they couldn't have kids at the time, and so they adopted him. And then they were able to have actually 3 more children afterwards. And it hit him pretty hard. He to the Minnesota National Guard as soon as he could. And he just needed some time to work through that. So Teddy, or Theodore, he ended up, of course, being in the Minnesota National Guard. They were drafted in pretty quickly to, not drafted, but
Deployed.
called up,
Yeah.
deployed. So there was a lot of training they did previous. In 1917, he actually was down along the border with Mexico because Pancho Villa was making all these raids. So
he was-
Pershing actually,
He was
before
part of
World
that.
War I, Pershing took down on. That's right. So he guarded the border. There was a punitive force that actually went over into Mexico to chase Pancho Villa and try to catch him, but he was not part of that. He was part of the to protect the border states from these guerrilla raids. So that's what he was doing. So they got some good experience there, and then he was shipped out in the early summer of 1918. Finally made it over there and to France, and he ended up he was in the 103rd Infantry, and ended up being kind of joining there was like a group that had been decimated, and so these guys were filling their ranks and kind of taking their spot, and so he was part of that. So in the Saint Michel offensive, which would be like the middle of September, he was at the front lines, and they went up, and he was injured by shrapnel. His military record says accidental GSW, which is gunshot wound, but it's shrapnel. So GSW was used also for artillery, not just rifle, because they're the big guns. And so the best I can figure out from my study of it is that they would bombard the positions ahead of the soldiers. But it did occasionally happen that if they didn't get the calculations right, they might be bombing too close to the guys who were going forward. So however it happened, he got injured by Allied fire, and he was then out. I mean, he hardly saw any fighting at all, but he did survive. Ended up coming back to, he was in hospitals in France, and he was at Verdun when he got injured, and so then he got shipped to Paris, and then eventually, after like 2 years, in 1920, he was transferred to Washington, D.C., to a veterans hospital there, and then to Chicago. And so he was at a hospital there, and it took 14 operations to get the shrapnel out of his legs, or out of his left leg, his femur. But the problem is that back then they weren't doing blood transfusions yet. So they had to operate on him, take out some shrapnel, patch him up, so he wouldn't bleed too much. He'd be in the bed for a while, and then he'd be able to move from there to a wheelchair and then to crutches. And then they'd do the whole cycle over again with the next operation. Meanwhile, he fell in love with a Red Cross nurse who was attending to him, and her name was Bernice. And they were planning on actually getting married once he was out. He didn't propose to her because he wanted to actually be able to stand and walk again first, so he could hold down a job, and then he could ask her to marry him. But he died on the operating table in 1921. So
Okay, that's too bad.
yeah.
Too bad. I'd like to comment on one thing that Coop said, which was his family was, the victim of, I guess, prejudice. In World War II, we had the Japanese, but they also had Germans and Italians were treated maybe not quite as harshly, but still. But in the First World War, it was a different thing, and they took, like Eugene Debs, he was socialist. Wilson's administration. I mean, Woodrow. Don't get me started on Woodrow Wilson. He was really a bad actor, but he put him in jail and anything like that. And I know the German population of Milwaukee, and there was quite a large one, were treated pretty badly. So that was it. But the other thing I'd like to say about World War One was I read a book by David Berlinski on um, basically is more philosophical than anything, but he has got a pretty good lead up to what happened up until World War One and how it started. And it was basically the arrogance and the stupidity of the European powers. Um, the in one case, I still remember that the German foreign ministry sent a strongly worded letter. I think it was in the shape of a what do you call it? Um, uh, it's on the tip of my tongue. They had to do it or else to the Serbians. But nobody in Serbia in the Serbian foreign ministry spoke German, so they couldn't translate it. You know, this was like the whole friggin' war, and of course the Tsar in Russia, and of course the Allies were trying to
Related.
help Lenin, the Bolsheviks, as much as they could, or the Germans were rather, and that's why they shipped Lenin in a sealed car all the way back to Russia from Switzerland. You know, it's just incredibly stupid that they went, and then the aftermath is still being felt today. And if you guys ever saw Chariots of the God or Chariots of Fire, incredible movie about the 1924 anyway British Olympic team, and their training base was Cambridge, and on one wall it's kind of like the USS Arizona Memorial if you've ever been there. Just the names of all the Cambridge people are graduates who died in the war, and it takes up a whole wall in this huge dining complex. And it's amazing, but Europe lost its religion, it lost its culture, it lost its belief in itself, and this is what you still see today.
I absolutely agree with Gary, and I think the video, if we can connect this to the video, the YouTube video, I was almost in tears when I was hearing, as you know, John Garth and the others were talking about what this meant. It wasn't just the loss of life, but it was an uncountable loss, and it was a blow to civilization, and absolutely that we're still living with the repercussions, and then to think what could these young men have accomplished, but they never got to. You know, that's just and so you're John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, and you're trying to do your best with communication lines and your job, and you're in the trench, and you're just seeing people die. You're getting letters about people who have died. I mean, this is pretty tragic.
Plus, you're dealing with trench foot and all the other horrible stuff, trench warfare.
And I think you could see this, these experiences manifest later in Tolkien's works, as early as probably his first work for Middle-earth, The Fall of Gondolin, which would end up in the Silmarillion. And also, John Garth made the connection between, Tolkien's pals in that TCBS group that he was a part of, the Tea Company and Barovian Society, I think it's known as, and the Fellowship of the Ring in Lord of the Rings, and how the kind of the breaking of the fellowship is pretty traumatic. And but in a sense, I think that Tolkien was inspired to write many of his works as to carry on the legacy of that initial group that he was part of, the TCBS.
Yes.
And like
and another thing,
yeah, go ahead.
Mordor was, I believe, patterned after the Somme.
Yeah.
The Battle of the Somme.
Yeah.
If you watch the 2019 movie titled Tolkien about that period of time with TCBS entering college, going off to war, and coming back as a changed man with his friends dead. Yeah, that movie gives a very good idea of the link between his writings and what he experienced. So this 2019 movie that I saw when it came out is probably the 2-hour version of what was compressed into 30 minutes.
Yeah.
With some additional dramatization. I think it's worth watching.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm hearing several different recommendations. Anthony, you're saying They Shall Not Grow Old is worthwhile watching.
Yeah. Yes, with Peter
Uh,
Jackson. Directed
and
by Peter
that's
Jackson.
right. Okay, so I need to watch that. That needs to be on my list.
Yeah.
And then the one you were just mentioning, Chris, again, which one was that?
It's titled Tolkien, and it's a
Oh, the biopic.
2019
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a 2019 release.
Yes. Yeah, I did see that. Did you see it, Gary?
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it.
I mean, it was okay. I mean, some parts of it were good. As a whole, I felt like it was lacking, but that's probably more to do with the fact that I would have liked more on that those four guys, and I felt like they had to be careful not to, there's the whole copyright thing. They didn't have the total freedom. It's kind of like Rings of Power without mentioning anything that's actually in the Silmarillion.
But I
But
thought Peter Jackson and his.
it did show Edith, though. It showed his love story with Edith. I like that. Go ahead, Gary.
Excuse me. I saw clips of the movie. They were young, or They'll Never Grow Old.
Yeah, They Shall Not Grow Old.
And and it's just like they're real folks, young adults, which they were. And I'd go back to my maternal grandfather, who I remember my mother sending me a photo clip of him in the local newspaper. And I mean, he was an electrician, he was also a mechanic. The picture was, he was standing as straight up as I could believe in his young self, because all I remember him was as an old man, kind of bent and stuff like that from years of work. So yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, you look at that. You think
he was that young.
the flower of manhood,
Yeah.
and I've got the dog tags were circular back then instead of rectangular.
I think the German ones were oval or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the stupid things. And the one thing I want to add is you got to give Tolkien and C.S. Lewis credit, because they still believed in the nobility of man. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good point.
The nobility of man. And
because you could go kind of Hemingway, right? I mean, you think about Hemingway and how the Spanish Civil War affected him.
Yeah.
And just very, very cynical, and he eventually took his own life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
Ketchum, Idaho. I've been there.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
it's a tourist trap, actually.
Right, but the trauma can turn you one of two ways.
Yeah,
and I think, as you're pointing out there, Gary, with Lewis and with Tolkien, they were on the one hand very realistic that this is really bad. This is not like, oh, we're going to be done, by the end of the year. But even so, they believed that there was still some beauty in the world, which is actually a line that Sam speaks.
Yes.
In The Return of the King. It's such a beautiful thing, and I think we keep coming back to this. And the fact that even that Lewis and Tolkien, especially Tolkien, but Lewis later on, would still believe that there was a God. I think, like you said, Gary, so eloquently, Europe lost so much. They lost their faith. They lost the glue that kind of held them together, all because of the arrogance. And it is you look at World War II and it seems much more of a just war. Like, we need to go in there and we need to stop these people because they're doing bad things, and we have to. But when you look at World War I, you think this is so preventable. You've got 3 guys who are cousins, essentially,
Yeah.
who control Britain and Russia and Germany.
Yeah.
And just
And they knew each other.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's easy when you can spend other people's lives, right?
Yeah, that's one of the problems was, they still had strong kings, strong rulers.
Yeah.
Autocracy.
Yeah.
So, shall we kind of let's see? Any last comments on Tolkien? So, Anthony, you mentioned a little bit more about how that definitely seemed to shape his view. I think of the fellowship, that was one of the things John Garth pointed out, which was very helpful.
Yeah.
Gary mentioned the kind of the landscape, the geography. I mean, how that would have affected Tolkien, the sense of seeing the devastation to nature. I mean, you can easily see the influence there without it being an allegory. That's part of his mental landscape. And then, of course, in the experience of soldiers in the war and how they could be shell-shocked. Chris, any last comments that you want to make about the influence of World War I on Tolkien?
It was just without going through that war, he probably would not have had the view of pure evil that he does when he wrote. He just, something about experiencing it firsthand makes it real enough for people to have it imprinted in their mind in such a way to write about it. And if you had not experienced it firsthand, he would have not written what he wrote.
I totally agree. And you know what I want to do? I want to write an article that says the louse that saved Tolkien so he could write The Lord of the Rings. And I want it to be all about the louse.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I mean, trench fever is caused by lice, and that's why
Yeah,
they saved Tolkien. That's what. Yeah.
So it's like a film that, when there's an actor who is not credited. The louse is the one who doesn't get the credit here.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to write it in Welsh poetical form, correct?
Oh boy.
Good luck, Brian.
Almost like Vogon poetry.
That's a great idea. I spent 1 year at Wisconsin, but I finished up my degree at University of Maryland Overseas Division, and one of my favorite professors was he was an Undersecretary of Defense for Far Eastern Affairs, and before that he was a curator of the Stanford Museum for Japanese, Chinese, and Mongolian studies and all this. Dennis Doolan. But he wrote a book called The Fluke That Saved Taiwan. And it was, in 1949, and Mao, I think, was trying to go over and get Taiwan also. But in one of the rivers there, adjacent to, that area of China, everybody in all their soldiers came down with some horrible disease. I can't remember what it was. Thanks for the fluke. So this is actually a good idea, Brian. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I found the disease. This is really fascinating. Wow. Okay. Time for a deep dive, I guess. Thanks, Gary. I'm going to put that in the. There's a great article on that. I'll put in the chat. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and segue then, guys, to Letters of Tolkien. And I think, Anthony, do you want us just start us off? I think maybe we might be on 217, but you and Gary will have to help Chris and I because we weren't there, so we don't know.
Yes. I think we already read 217 because it concerns a Polish translation of The Lord of the Rings, unless we want to read it again just because we're talking about translations. But I don't know. We could do. Do you want to do 219 and 220?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
They're both short.
Yeah.
I don't know that we got 218 though, did we?
Oh.
I think 216 and 217 you did last time.
Okay. Oh, I guess you're right. Okay, let's do 218 then. Okay, who wants to read?
You go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This is letter 218 to Eric Rogers. This is a reply to a letter addressed to any professor of English language at Oxford, asking whether it is correct to say a number of office walls has been damaged or have been damaged. Actually, I think we might have read this letter, but let's read it again.
Yes, yeah, you read it, or somebody read it.
Oh, actually, you're right. I think I did see this on the notes, or you guys were talking about have and has.
Yeah, have and has, yes. So should we skip to 219 then?
Sure.
Okay. 219, from letter to Ellen and Wenwin, October 14th, 1959. A Cambridge cat breeder had asked if she could register a litter of Siamese kittens under names taken from The Lord of the Rings. My only comment is that of Puck upon mortals. I fear that to me Siamese cats belong to the fauna of Mordor, but you need not tell the cat breeder that.
What did he mean about Puck? I mean, Puck was a character that they had in English.
Yes. Yes, he's, I think, thinking of the quotation from Midsummer Night's Dream, in which Puck says, "Lord, what fools these mortals be."
Yeah.
I think that's the quotation.
All right. I forgot about that.
It's an indirect insult, I think, is what he's doing there.
And he didn't like Siamese cats.
We need like a Tolkien insult generator, you know, like that is very indirect ways of telling you that you're wrong. Anything else on the cat comment here? Why Siamese cats belong to the fauna of Mordor?
Yeah, well, they are kind of difficult. They can be very difficult at times. You know, more so than other cats, I think. Cats are kind of individualistic and selfish. Anyway,
Yes.
we got two of them.
Yes, we have two of them.
And
I'm sure Tolkien would have distasted very much the Disneyfication of Siamese cats.
Well, how many of you guys know? Oh, am I muted again?
No, we can hear you.
How many of you guys know that Sauron was originally a cat?
Yes, Tevildo, Prince of Cats.
What?
Which also sounds like Shakespeare.
Yeah.
There's the Tolkien Gateway link for it.
Yeah.
Fun fact. So yeah, I don't think Tolkien was a cat lover myself. Although I think with dogs you can make an argument that dogs could be good or evil. You have got like Huon the Hound is the good side.
Yeah.
And then you've got Karkaroth, the big werewolf, or yeah, one of those. But I don't know of any good cats. Do the cats of Queen Beruthiel count? I don't think so. I don't know.
That's a rather obscure reference, anyway.
That is very obscure. Yeah.
I don't think
Okay,
Tolkien's-
go ahead. All right. Chris or Gary, do you want to read 220?
Okay, I'll read that. 220 from a letter to Naomi Mitchison, 15 October 1959. I retired. Well, he's writing, say, I retired, or rather, since even British generals usually imply a voluntary movement to the rear when they retire, I was extruded on the age limit at the end of last term. Quite an interesting way of saying that. In many ways, a melancholy proceeding, especially financially. Though I have belonged to FSSU.
Okay, what's that?
That is the Federated Superannuation Scheme for Universities.
Okay. Since it began in 1920, it does not provide enough for one to live on one's laurels. Old and dusty as Christmas decorations in January. Okay. Without the assistance of hobbits and all things and all that, things would be meager. Nonetheless, not a little encouraged by your letter, I decided to get off the treadmill and resign from my appointment in Ireland before I return. I shall, if I get a chance, turn back to the matter of the Red Book and Allied histories soon.
Wow. This Naomi Mitchison really was a frequent correspondent with Tolkien. I mean, I feel like I've read at least 2 other letters that he wrote to her. I feel like she gets some good credit for helping encourage him and spurring him on, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget who she was. But...
Tolkien was he was a great postponer of, things he had to do. So,
in other words, a procrastinator.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that comment on extruded means that he was pushed out. That's what he's using fancy language.
Yeah.
He was pushed out because he was too old.
Yeah, that is exactly what it means. Like when you have a scuba tank, it starts out as a chunk of metal, and what they do is, in the aluminum ones anyway, is just get in there and just push it out into the shape of a tank, and it's quite interesting. There's no seams or anything. So
that makes sense for scuba. Yeah, you would want seams.
No, you don't. At one time, they had their tank had seams.
Hey, Gary, my tank is leaking.
Seems to me that you would not want that.
There's bubbles coming out of your tank. It's the wrong part of your tank. Okay. Yeah. All right. So, anything else on Ireland? There's a comment here, Anthony. Do you want to read the footnote?
Yeah, it refers to his position as an examiner to the National University of Ireland.
So basically, extra income, but it kept him too busy to write.
Yeah. And I think he was making more money writing.
Yeah, I think so. I'll read 221.
Sure.
From a letter to the first assistant registrar, Oxford University, 24th of November, 1959. Following Tolkien's retirement, the Board of the Faculty of English sent an appreciation of his long and invaluable service and expressed its regret that it will not in future have the benefit of your wise advice and unsparing help in its deliberations. It wishes at the same time to express its sense of the distinction which your wide, meticulous, and imaginative scholarship has brought to the faculty and to the university. End quote. Tolkien. I am deeply grateful to the Board of the Faculty of English for the extremely generous terms in which they have addressed me. My only misgiving is that they present a picture of a professor far superior to the one that has retired. However, conscious merit is no doubt a solace and support, but there is nonetheless a peculiar pleasure in receiving honors and compliments one doesn't deserve. One result of retirement that I never expected that I actually missed the meetings of the board. Not, of course, the agenda, but the gathering together of so many dear friends. I wasn't aware that, I thought that earlier letter had to do with his military, what was it here? I thought the retirement piece was, okay, so he was talking about being the teacher. Okay.
Yeah.
So
well,
basically, in the last letter, he was saying, okay, I've retired from teaching. Is that right?
So the last position that you possess in academia is the dean or chair of the board of your college. And when the faculty in your college want to take a different direction, they push you out.
Oh.
Well,
and so that seems to be the case even today, is that chairs that have good governance and are flexible tend to last longer. The chair of my department at the University of Washington was very well respected and had friends at higher up places in the university and got lots of grant and research money as a result. But there was some turmoil, especially in the computer science department. And it seemed like every 2 years or so, the computer science chair got pushed out.
Well, apparently he was 67 years old when he retired. So I guess that makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, he was born in 1892. So I guess, but as he's pointed out in the previous letter, it's not like he's got a fat retirement. He doesn't have like a great, what do you call that? Pension.
A nest egg.
Yeah. So
yeah, he had an annuity, but
And he'd been paying into it since 1920.
okay.
right.
Yeah, but thankfully, because of hobbits and all that,
Yeah.
it actually helped him to be able to live somewhat comfortably rather than on rations, so to speak. Don't you love his? I gotta say about Americans, we have our great things about us, right? We tend to be more I don't know, more willing to try new things, more innovative, et cetera, et cetera.
Adventurous.
But British, I mean, this is self-deprecation at its best. Tolkien's
Yes.
like could have been like really cranky, like, yeah, thanks guys for laying me off, But
Well, that's
Cynical. He could have been more cynical.
that's what distinguishes a Scottish or Irish person from a British or Welsh person.
English or Welsh, yeah.
Is that that ire
Yeah.
towards your betters?
Yeah.
It seems.
Well, I love it that it's very nice because clearly he's what are you talking about, Tolkien? They give you an appropriate compliment. Just say thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't help but compare this to Lewis, and Lewis left Oxford because he felt that he was passed over and he was looked down on because he wrote children's stories. That's not a very serious academic pursuit, Mr. Lewis.
Yeah.
So he was offered a job at Cambridge and he moved to Cambridge, which was sad because that meant he and Tolkien, Jack and Tollers couldn't, hang out together.
Yeah. As often.
But I understand that concept because my grandmother in San Francisco was a very British lady, and she self-deprecated all over herself every time we saw her.
Yeah.
And it was
It is, yeah.
it's glorious, but at some point it goes too far.
Yeah. I think it's a way, from my experience living there for 4 years, it's a way for people to try, like, it's almost like, how do I make sure that I don't act like an arrogant idiot? Oh, I know. I will just like brush off any attempts to give me credit because by making fun of myself, I can't be seen as someone who is bragging, because I think in their culture, someone who makes a big deal about himself is absolutely the worst.
Yeah.
And that goes all the way up to the Queen.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I still like, he was not happy about being forced out.
True.
And the word he uses here was extruded, okay?
Yeah.
But I like what he even said about the British generals usually imply a voluntary movement to the rear when they retire. That's a withdrawal.
Yes.
Because they were getting their butts kicked.
They're called rear admirals for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like probably it was time for him to move on, but I think it's hard to know when, right? When you
Yeah.
get older and you're in a position like that, I with responsibility, I don't think I would want to, but at some point you need to make room for other leadership. It's not that he was done being a good professor because clearly he had a lot of input, but in a sense it's also a mixed blessing. Like that this it did give him more time to write, didn't it? And I mean,
Yeah.
this is 1959. He lived for 14 more years.
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yes. Yeah. I guess the only sad thing or unfortunate thing is he never lived long enough to finish the Silmarillion properly.
Yeah.
I guess he probably
Yeah,
would have had to have
properly.
been an immortal elf in order to finish that task. But
Yeah, understood. Okay, gentlemen.
oh, you're muted again.
Yeah, what happened?
Oh, I muted myself. That was a great discussion. Let's move on then to our final thing. Is there anything related to Tolkien's writings that has bubbled up into popular culture lately? Any news updates that you wanted to refer to?
Other than the new version of this?
Did that come out already?
No, it
No,
comes
I don't
out
think so.
November 14th. Available
Okay.
in physical and electronic formats.
Right.
In time for Christmas.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is kind of a mixed sadness and joy, but in 2020, the Eagle and Child closed.
Oh yes.
And so the Ellison Institute of Technology, founded by Larry Ellison, has bought the Eagle and Child and wants to bring it back up to reopen and refurbish it for use. Now, one thing that I never made the connection of that seems to have been pointed out in this article in the BBC is that the pub was in a village called St. Giles. Did you know that?
No.
So Farmer Giles
Yes.
has a place.
Yeah. There we go.
I mean, I've been on that road, but I never made the connection. That's really cool.
Farmer Giles.
The previous plans were to turn it into a hotel, but they decided against it eventually. So this is
So, do you think
good.
that's going to be overall good?
As long as they keep it open to the public and don't leave it and don't make it some sort of private land holding like Larry Ellison has an entire island in Hawaii that he's trying to kick out all the natives on.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
boy.
So time will tell what
Larry
happens.
Ellison, I'm not familiar with it. What is he the head of?
CEO of Oracle.
Oh.
Oh, okay. He's an American then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that must grind the British a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just American money going and buying up. Yeah.
That's how it all started with Hawaii, don't you know? With those sugar plantations and the American. Let's annex Hawaii.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing that got posted was that New Zealand has put out their 2-ounce silver coin and 1-ounce silver coins for the Lord of the Ring 20th anniversary of the Return of the King and a bunch of postage stamps. So if you're a stamp collector or coin collector, they are available from the New Zealand Post website. And of course, they will happily mail them to you.
Nice.
For a fee.
And the third would be that there
That's
is
a
a
coin,
new,
did you say?
yes, coin and stamps.
Okay.
And then the third is in Asheville, North Carolina. There is a Hobbit Knoll that has been constructed. It's a bed and breakfast that you can stay in and then go visit your friendly news publication, the World News Group.
Fun.
But it's up in the hills, out of town with a good view,
Nice.
and looks quite complimentary to the
I
landscape.
still don't know. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I still don't know how somebody. What's that?
Oh, just that's what I had.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I was going to say, I still don't know how the bed and breakfasts, avoid cease and desist letters
Yeah.
with using words like The Hobbit or Shire or Bag End. But all they'd have to do is call it like the Halfling Settlement or the Halfling Hotel, and they wouldn't have a problem with this at all. So
Yeah.
round doors are not trademarked, thankfully.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like that's all we had, unless Gary or Anthony had anything else they wanted to refer to. I don't know, when does Rings of Power Season 2 come out?
Oh, we had talked about this last month, I think, with Gary.
Yeah, we have. I don't know.
Oh,
It's there's still no firm release date for the second season. Maybe it could be as late as 2024 or 2025. But I would imagine in the next year or so, if I had to venture a guess.
well, that strike probably didn't help anything, did it?
Oh, the writer's strike? No. Yeah.
Writers and actors strike.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
And I think the actors finally realized that the studios that they got the best deal they were going to get.
Yeah.
Because they don't even need the actors anymore with AI. So
You might be
they
right.
don't.
You might be right about that, unfortunately.
I like what Brian.
Oh my
said.
goodness.
I like what Brian said in his latest email to us that we're the Inland Pacific Tolkien Society Smile. The Inland Pacific, or the Pacific Inland Tolkien.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I wrote that because
Yeah.
I probably botched it. It used to be called the Inland Northwest Tolkien Society, and then it got changed to AI Tolkien.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay, well-
I'm not sure what hybrid I ended up writing down.
Oh, the Inland. You're right. Inland Northwest Tolkien Society.
Yeah.
It sounds like the Puget Sound is stretched all the way to the Rocky Mountains or something, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen the state of Washington, a map that looks like it's drawn in the same style as Middle Earth? They do
Yeah.
that now for every. There's a website. There's a guy who basically does this for every state.
Whoa, really? That's
Oh
interesting.
yeah, yep,
I would love to check that out.
yeah. You guys can look it up. It's just I think it's called State of Washington map Middle Earth, and you'll probably find it. Did anybody else have any last comments before we sign off?
The next time we meet is going to be in December on the
On the 9th.
on the 9th. Okay.
That'd be the 9th is the second Saturday.
Yes.
Hopefully we can get Sarah back and, have her read us some
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings in Italian.
It would be really good to get her perspective.
I'll work on that. Yep. Yeah. So December 9, yeah? Everybody sound good?
Yep.
Does that still work best for you, Anthony? Because I believe we were going with the second because the Spark Central was either the first or the third.
Yeah. Yes, the second Saturday works perfectly for me.
Yeah. And what's the current? Is the community center? It's not open to the public, correct? As far as
It's I think so. Yeah, it's not shut down, but it's just close to the public.
Not doing. Is training still going on for
Yeah, I think there's still internal
people like
yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry that Hawk couldn't be with us right now. So yeah, he had to quickly bring some things over to his wife in Seattle, so we can be keeping Katie in our thoughts and prayers as her parents are not doing well.
Yeah.
So, Gary, it's so good to see you, and I couldn't help but laugh. The last video or the video or the YouTube from the last month when I wasn't here. Well, it's been 3 months since I've been here, but anyway, you said something like, because there were some audio issues at the beginning, and you were like, I'm going to have to get on an airplane and fly over there just so we can have a meeting.
Yeah.
Well, my wife and I just went to Colorado Springs.
Nice.
To see her brother. And,
okay. Well,
but that's an hour flight and probably less than that from Boise to Spokane. It's
Are you closer to Boise or Lewiston?
Boise. Boise's 40 miles.
Oh wow!
And it's a straight shot up to the airport. I mean, it's easy.
We'll wine and dine you up here, okay?
Yeah.
Well,
or at least I'll dine you. I'll dine you. Cooperstein will have to do the wine because he's over there in the sun belt of Washington there with his vineyard.
And an ale is fine too. And I was just thinking of another thing. Reaching out to Sarah. Reach out to Esther again. I don't know.
Yeah.
But she had some good comments.
She did. Anthony, maybe you can find out if she left behind any information for contacting.
I could look at the sign-in sheets and see.
And
okay, I will try at some point in the next week or two to write up some notes from our meeting, and then I'll send that out to y'all, and then maybe you can send it on to her so that hopefully she'll join us for December.
Sounds good.
Anything else?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, hopefully maybe in 2024, Gary, you can hop on that plane and when it's warm and nice up here, and we can get together and go out for a pint.
I remember what you promised. So.
Okay. Well, so also just keep this in mind that if I'm around, March is the destruction of the ring, right? It's that kind of a reminder of that part.
Yeah.
So March would be a great time to come up, or September, Frodo and Bilbo's birthday.
Yes.
Or any time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I'll sign off, and then Anthony's going to stop the stream. So those of you who might be watching later, and all those of you who joined us today, we wish you well. Namarie.
Yep.
Namarie.